The moment my boss said I was not leadership material, something inside me went very still. Not angry, not loud, just focused. Because I've learned that when people underestimate you, they usually talk too much right after. It happened in a glass conference room on the 32nd floor, the kind with walls so transparent they pretend the company has nothing to hide. I had just finished presenting a strategy that would save our division millions over the next 2 quarters. The room had gone quiet. Not impressed quiet, calculating quiet. The kind where people decide who gets credit before results even exist. I was the only Black woman at the table. Again. My boss leaned back in his chair, fingers interlocked behind his head, eyes sliding past me like I was part of the furniture. He thanked everyone else first. Then he turned to me with a tight smile that never reached his eyes and said my analysis was solid, but I lacked executive presence. He said leadership required a certain tone, a certain comfort level, things that can't really be taught. I nodded. I always nod. Not because I agree, but because I listen. The meeting ended quickly after that. Chairs scraped, laptops snapped shut. People avoided eye contact with me in that careful way that pretends neutrality but smells like relief. Relief that it wasn't them. Relief that the line had been drawn around someone else. As we walked out, my boss motioned for me to stay back. The hallway emptied. The office lights hummed softly above us. Through the windows, the city looked powerful and distant, a skyline built by people who never look like me, yet somehow always need me. He lowered his voice. That's when the real meeting started. He told me I should be grateful to even be in the room, that pushing for leadership roles might make others uncomfortable, that I should focus on being a strong support player because not everyone is meant to lead, some are meant to assist leaders. His words were smooth, practiced, delivered like advice, not limitation, like concern, not control. I felt the familiar burn behind my eyes, but I didn't let it show. Years in corporate America had trained me well. I kept my face calm, professional, agreeable. I thanked him for the feedback. I told him I appreciated his honesty. What I didn't tell him was that I had recorded every word. Not intentionally at first. I joined the meeting remotely earlier that morning, and my phone recorder was still running in my pocket, a habit I picked up after too many misunderstandings and miscommunications that somehow always worked against me. I didn't stop it. He leaned closer then, confident, comfortable, certain of his power. He said something else, something quieter, sharper, something about how the executive team already had enough diversity optics and how leadership wasn't about optics, it was about trust. Trust. A word that sounds clean until you realize who never qualifies for it. I walked back to my desk in silence, my pulse steady, my mind racing. Around me, the office buzzed like nothing had happened. Emails flew, coffee machines hissed, careers moved forward, just not mine. Or so they thought, because what my boss didn't know was that the CEO had been in that same building all morning. Unexpected visit, closed-door meetings, rumors spreading quietly through executive floors like electricity before a storm. And what he definitely didn't know was that my phone wasn't the only thing that hurt him. By the time I reached my desk, I had an email waiting. Subject line, quick follow-up, today's meeting. Sender, Office of the CEO. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I had a feeling this story was no longer about whether I was leadership material. It was about who was about to be exposed and who was about to fall. I opened the email 3 times before my brain accepted it was real. A calendar invite, private, same day, same building, executive floor. No explanation, no small talk, just a time, a room number, and a line that said, "Please come alone." That's when I understood something important. Whatever my boss thought he controlled, he no longer did. I spent the rest of the afternoon moving through the office like a ghost. People smiled at me without seeing me. Others avoided me with sudden urgency. My boss passed my desk once and didn't stop. He didn't need to. In his world, the hierarchy was already settled. He believed the story ended with me quietly accepting my place. I let him believe that. When the time came, I took the elevator alone. The higher it climbed, the quieter everything became. No chatter, no ringing phones, just soft music and glass walls that reflected a version of me I'd worked my whole life to become. Composed, capable, unshakable. The executive floor smelled different, like polished wood and expensive decisions. The conference room door was already open. Inside, the CEO sat at the head of the table, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, not rushed, not distracted, the kind of calm that comes from knowing the truth is already on its way to you. Two legal representatives sat along the side, laptops open, eyes alert. No one told me to sit. I chose my seat carefully. The CEO didn't waste time. He thanked me for my presentation earlier that day. He said my work had been reviewed, independently, and described as exceptionally strategic. He paused, then added that he was interested in understanding why someone with my performance record hadn't been considered for leadership development. I felt my pulse slow. This was not an accident. This was an investigation. I spoke carefully, not defensively. I explained my trajectory, my reviews, the consistent praise paired with consistent stagnation. I didn't accuse, I didn't dramatize. I simply laid the pattern on the table and let it speak for itself. Then the CEO asked a question that changed the temperature in the room. He asked me what happened after the meeting. I took a breath. I told him about the hallway conversation, about the advice, about the warnings disguised as concern, about the invisible boundaries I was encouraged not to cross. I kept my voice even, professional, controlled. And then I said something that made one of the lawyers stop typing. I told them I had a recording. Silence fell, heavy, deliberate. I didn't play it right away. I waited. I watched their faces shift from curiosity to calculation. The CEO nodded once, slowly, and asked me to continue. So I did. I explained that I hadn't intended to record anyone, that the file existed because experience had taught me to protect myself, that I had kept it private, until I realized the consequences of staying silent were heavier than the risks of being heard. Only then did I press play. The room filled with my boss's voice, confident, casual, certain. Every word landed exactly as it had that afternoon, except now it echoed differently, stripped of context, stripped of power, exposed. No one interrupted it. When it ended, no one spoke for several seconds. The CEO leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. Not surprised, disappointed. The kind of disappointment that means someone has already fallen in your mind, even if their title hasn't caught up yet. He thanked me for my transparency. He said the company took these matters seriously. He said there would be a review. Then he said something else, something quieter. He said he'd like me to stay exactly where I was for the moment, not to discuss this with anyone, not to change my behavior, not to react. He wanted to see who would expose themselves. I left that room knowing two things. First, my boss had no idea the ground beneath him was already cracking. Second, I was no longer just an employee waiting to be chosen. I was evidence. And somewhere below, in the same office where he once told me to be grateful, my boss was still walking around like a man who believed he was untouchable. He wouldn't be for long, because the next meeting on the calendar had his name on it. Power doesn't collapse loudly at first. It panics quietly. The morning after my meeting with the CEO, the office felt different. Not dramatic, not chaotic, just tense. Like the air knew something the people didn't. Conversations lowered when I walked by. Meetings got rescheduled without explanation. Executives who never noticed me before suddenly remembered my name. And my boss? He started performing. He sent emails praising my initiative, copied senior leaders unnecessarily, complimented my work in public channels where he had once stayed silent. He stopped by my desk with a smile that felt rehearsed, asking if I needed support, the kind of support that arrives only when someone senses danger. I gave him nothing. Same tone, same posture, same professionalism he had always expected from me. That's when he began to unravel. He scheduled one-on-one meetings that led nowhere, asked vague questions about my long-term goals as if he'd ever cared before, mentioned future opportunities without naming them, promised visibility without offering substance. Every move felt reactive, not strategic. He didn't know what I'd said, he didn't know what had been heard, but he knew something was coming. And people like him don't fear accountability, they fear exposure. Midweek, an internal audit began reviewing performance evaluations across departments. No announcement, no warning, just data requests and calendar blocks appearing on leadership schedules. My name appeared repeatedly, not as a problem, but as an anomaly. High performance, consistent results, no advancement. Patterns don't lie when someone finally looks at them. Meanwhile, I stayed invisible by design. I worked, I delivered, I didn't react. That restraint was the hardest part, because when you've been underestimated your entire career, silence feels unnatural, like surrender. But this wasn't surrender. This was strategy. Then came the message I wasn't supposed to see. An email chain forwarded to me by mistake, or maybe by courage. A junior analyst I barely knew sent it with a single line. I thought you should have this. It was my boss, writing upward, defending himself. He described me as talented but sensitive, said I misinterpreted guidance, claimed his words were taken out of context. He positioned himself as a mentor whose intentions were misunderstood by someone still learning corporate dynamics. Still learning after 12 years in the industry? I didn't respond, I didn't forward it. I archived it carefully because I knew something he didn't. The story was no longer his to control. By Friday, leadership called for an emergency strategy meeting, attendance mandatory, cameras on, notes recorded. My boss spoke too much. He filled silence with explanations no one asked for, repeated phrases like company culture and alignment, tried to sound calm while tightening his grip on the table. His confidence had cracks now, small but visible to those trained to see them. The CEO listened without interrupting. That's when I realized the most dangerous moment for someone like my boss isn't when they're confronted, it's when they're allowed to keep talking. After the meeting, the CEO requested a follow-up, this time with expanded attendance, HR, legal, board observers, and me. My boss looked at me then, really looked at me, not dismissive, not superior, afraid. Because in that moment, he understood something too late. I wasn't trying to replace him. I wasn't trying to challenge him. I was surviving him. And survival, when documented properly, becomes undeniable. As I packed up my laptop that evening, another email arrived. Subject line, Monday, 8 a.m., attendance required. No agenda, no names listed, just a meeting. I closed my computer slowly, because I knew what Monday was. Monday wasn't about leadership material, it was about consequences. And this time, he wouldn't be the one deciding who was ready.
Monday mornings usually belonged to people with power. This one belonged to the truth. I arrived early, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to see who avoided eye contact first. The executive conference room was larger than any I'd been in before. Long table, leather chairs, a quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself. The blinds were half open, letting in a gray morning light that made everything feel exposed. People filtered in one by one. HR, legal, 2 board observers I recognized only from internal newsletters, senior leaders who rarely sat in the same room unless something had gone very wrong. My boss came in last. He wore confidence like armor, polished shoes, tailored suit, practiced smile, but I noticed the details others missed. The way his jaw tightened when he saw my name already printed on the agenda, the way he chose a seat slightly farther from the CEO than usual, the way he avoided looking at me altogether. The CEO opened the meeting without ceremony. No speeches, no corporate poetry. He said the company was reviewing leadership integrity, performance alignment, and cultural risk. He said recent information had raised concerns that required immediate clarity. He reminded everyone that this was a fact-finding discussion, but consequences would follow facts, not titles. That sentence landed hard. HR began presenting data, performance reviews, promotion timelines, compensation adjustments. The screen filled with charts that told a story no one could interrupt. My metrics were highlighted, not dramatically, just clearly. Consistent top-tier performance, documented contributions, strategic impact. Then came the comparison. Peers hired after me, promoted ahead of me, with fewer results and more exposure. Names were mentioned, dates were shown. Silence grew heavier with every slide. My boss shifted in his chair. When HR finished, the CEO turned to him and asked a simple question. He asked him to explain the discrepancy. My boss smiled, the same smile he used when he thought charm could smooth anything. He spoke about readiness, fit, intangibles, leadership presence. He said promotions weren't just about results, they were about perception. Perception? The CEO nodded slowly, then asked if perception included discouraging hallway conversations that suggested certain employees should know their place. The room froze. My boss blinked once, twice. Legal cleared their throat. HR stopped taking notes. The CEO didn't raise his voice, he didn't accuse, he simply asked whether my boss recognized the phrasing. That's when the power finally cracked. My boss denied it at first, said it sounded exaggerated, said he would never phrase feedback that way, said his intentions were always supportive. That's when the CEO looked at me. He asked if I was comfortable sharing what I had already shared privately. I stood up, not because I was told to, but because I wanted them to remember the moment they finally listened. I didn't add emotion, I didn't add commentary. I pressed play. The recording filled the room again, but this time it felt different, louder, sharper, more final. Every word echoed against the walls of authority my boss had hidden behind for years. No one interrupted it. When it ended, the CEO didn't look at my boss right away. He looked at the board observers, then HR, then legal. Only then did he turn back to the man who had once told me to be grateful. He asked him one last question. He asked whether leadership was about protecting comfort or protecting integrity. My boss couldn't answer. He couldn't. The CEO thanked him for his time and told him HR would follow up immediately. He didn't say the word termination. He didn't need to. Power doesn't explain itself when it's done with you. My boss stood up slowly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor, the first uncontrolled sound he'd made all morning. He didn't look at me as he left. I stayed seated because I knew this wasn't over yet. After the door closed, the CEO addressed the room again. He said accountability wasn't punishment, it was correction. He said the company had failed by allowing patterns to persist unnoticed. He said that would change. Then he turned to me. He said leadership material doesn't announce itself. It survives pressure. It documents truth. It waits for the right moment, and then it stands. He asked me to stay after. Everyone else filed out quietly, avoiding my eyes now for a different reason. When the room was empty, the CEO told me there was one more conversation to have, not about the past, but about what happens next, and that conversation would decide who I'd be answering to from now on.
When the door closed behind the last executive, the silence felt intentional. The CEO didn't rush. He gathered his papers slowly, like someone who already knew the outcome but wanted me to understand the weight of it. Then he gestured for me to sit back down, even though I hadn't moved. He said something I hadn't expected. He apologized. Not vaguely, not on behalf of the organization. He apologized directly for the years my performance had been contained instead of cultivated, for the emotional labor of staying professional while being diminished quietly, for the fact that it had taken evidence, not excellence, to be believed. That mattered more than any title. Then he told me my boss had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending termination, access revoked, teams reassigned, his authority gone in a single morning. But that wasn't the offer. The offer came next. He said the company was restructuring the division, that leadership gaps had been exposed, not just in one person, but in a system that rewarded comfort over competence. He said they needed someone who understood the work and the cost of ignoring it. He said my name had come up, not as a replacement, as a correction. The role wasn't a promotion in the traditional sense. It was a new position, reporting directly to executive leadership, bypassing the layers that had stalled me for years. Strategic authority, decision-making power, visibility that couldn't be quietly erased. A seat at the table with no hallway conversations attached. I listened carefully, asked questions, clarified expectations, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about sustainability. I wasn't interested in inheriting a broken structure unless I was allowed to fix it. The CEO agreed. He said leadership without protection is just exposure, and this role came with both authority and backing. He said change needed someone who had already proven they could withstand pressure without becoming bitter. That's when I felt it. Not triumph, not relief, but alignment. I accepted, not eagerly, not emotionally. I accepted the way women like me always do, with awareness of what it cost to get here and what it would cost to stay. By the afternoon, the news spread. My boss's name disappeared from email threads. His office was emptied quietly. People speculated in low voices. Some looked at me with curiosity, others with sudden respect. A few with discomfort, the kind that comes when the rules change and no one hands you the new ones. HR announced leadership changes without details, corporate language, clean edges, no drama. But I knew the truth. This wasn't about one man losing his job. It was about a narrative collapsing. Over the next few weeks, I stepped into rooms I had only ever been invited to serve, not lead. I asked questions that made people shift in their seats. I introduced processes that made bias harder to hide behind subjectivity. I documented everything. Some people adjusted, others resisted, and some exposed themselves without realizing it. Late one evening, as I packed up after another long day, I found a handwritten note on my desk. No name, just a sentence. I didn't think someone like you could actually change things. I was wrong. I folded it carefully and placed it in my bag, because I knew something they still didn't. This story wasn't finished. There was one final moment coming, one that would tie everything together, one that would prove this wasn't luck, or timing, or optics. It was consequence, and it would arrive when I least expected it, from the one person who thought he'd already lost everything. I didn't expect to see him again. People like my former boss usually disappear quietly. Consulting roles, extended personal time,
A vague LinkedIn update months later about new beginnings. The system has a way of cushioning their fall. So when his name appeared on my calendar 3 months later, I stared at the screen longer than I care to admit. Exit interview, requested by employee. He had asked for it. HR gave me the option to decline. They said it was procedural, optional, unnecessary. They said my presence wasn't required. That's how I knew I needed to go. The conference room was smaller this time. No glass walls, no audience. Just 2 chairs, a table, and a neutrality that felt almost merciful. He was already there when I arrived. Thinner somehow, less polished, still professional but stripped of certainty. He stood when I entered. I didn't. I told him to sit. That was the moment he understood. The power shift wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It lived in posture, in permission, in the fact that I was no longer asking for space. I was occupying it. He tried to explain himself, said the company culture had shaped him, said he never meant harm, said pressure makes people say things they don't fully believe. I listened. I always do. When he finished, I told him the truth, calmly, clearly, without cruelty. I told him the problem was never the words, it was the pattern, the certainty that he could decide who belonged and who should stay small, the belief that leadership looked like him, sounded like him, and felt safest when it didn't have to change. I told him that what ended his career wasn't a recording, it was arrogance. I reminded him of the day he told me to be grateful. I told him that gratitude had nothing to do with it, because I had earned every seat I was denied. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and said something that surprised me. He said he hadn't recognized me as a leader because he'd never had to report to someone like me. I nodded, because that was the point. The interview ended quietly. HR thanked us both. He left first. No confrontation, no apology that mattered. I stayed behind for a moment. I thought about the woman I was when this started. Careful, contained, constantly adjusting herself to fit rooms that were never built with her in mind. And I thought about who I was now, still careful, still strategic, but no longer shrinking. Weeks later, I stood in front of a new cohort of managers during leadership onboarding. Different faces, different backgrounds, different futures. I told them leadership isn't about presence, it's about responsibility, about what you protect, about who you listen to when no one else is watching. After the session, the CEO caught up with me in the hallway. He smiled and said the culture metrics were changing, faster than expected. I smiled back. Because change doesn't come from being called leadership material. It comes from surviving dismissal, documenting truth, and staying ready for the moment the system finally asks you who you really are. And when it does, you answer, without asking permission.